Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all of you for your testimony today. Due to the continued impact and potential spread of COVID-19, it is likely that some schools will need to keep their physical buildings closed, either fully or partially, for all or some of our students. States and districts and schools and educators moved to adjust quickly in the face of this unprecedented pandemic. But we do have to acknowledge the support for and quality of distance education provided to students this spring varied significantly across classrooms or schools or districts and states. And some of the recent research and media reports indicate that students facing some of the greatest challenges during COVID-19, low-income students, students of color, students with disabilities, English learners, homelessness, youth in foster care, migrant children, also received less access to high quality instruction in many instances. So Secretary King, let me ask you, what are the lessons we can learn from the successes and failures of distance learning over the past several months? And what should states and districts be doing now to plan for the likely need of distance learning this fall?
So I think what we've seen is that devices remain a challenge. Access to devices remain a challenge for families. Yeah, as you described, you often have the situation where maybe there's one device in the home, but there are multiple kids and they need to be able to use devices simultaneously.
Or the parents, they need the device too.
Exactly. Bandwidth remains a challenge, and certainly Commissioner Schwinn pointed out the challenge in rural communities. We also see in lots of high needs urban communities a lack of bandwidth. We also see places where cable companies won't allow a family to access internet service if they have an unpaid balance on their cable bill. The result is those families are without internet access. So tackling the digital divide is essential. We also know that teachers in under-resourced districts didn't have the professional development and support they needed. And so we need to make an investment in teacher professional development this summer so that we can prepare for next school year effectively. I think given the public health context and students with pre-existing health conditions, it's almost certain that every school district will need some degree of hybrid learning. And so we should prepare for that eventuality.
Okay. Estimates show that students in grades 3 to 8 could return to school this fall, only retaining 70% of their reading progress from the previous school year and lose anywhere from half to all of their academic growth in math. So this spring's closures and the inconsistent support for distance learning programs are projected to cause achievement gaps that existed before this pandemic to widen significantly. Secretary King, let me have you speak to this. What policies can states or districts and schools put in place now to measure learning loss, whether schools are physically open or providing distance learning? And what types of promising practices can you talk about to help tailor academic intervention?
Well, we certainly need diagnostic assessments to have a sense of where kids are and what ground they've lost. And Commissioner Schwinn in Tennessee and Commissioner Morath in Texas are making available state funds to support those diagnostic assessments. That will be very helpful to districts. But once we know students are behind, we have to do something about it. What some of our international peers have done is open school early for the highest needs students, students with disabilities, students who are significantly behind academically. That may be a part of the strategy. Summer distance learning may be a part of the strategy. Randy Weingarten and I wrote an op-ed calling for a significant investment by districts in summer learning. We also know that next school year, students will need more time to make up for what they've lost. And that will mean adapting the school schedule to allow for extended learning time. We also know intensive tutoring has a very strong evidence base. One of the reasons why I'm very supportive of efforts to expand AmeriCorps to provide more tutors in schools to support kids' learning.
Okay, thank you. And finally, let me just start this question by first saying thank you to all the educators and support staff that have been navigating this crisis. Surveys are showing that nearly 2 of every 3 educators have health concerns about resuming in-person instruction this fall. 18% of educators, 27% of principals are over the age of 55, and according to CDC, older adults are at increased risk. Many educators have pre-existing conditions. They're worried about the health of their family members. They face childcare and hardships related to the virus. And I heard someone suggest that older educators, many of them whom are very passionate about their work, should retire early. Well, that's callous and unacceptable to me as an answer. So maybe Dr. Schwinn or Dr. Blomstedt, I just have a few seconds left. I'll go with Dr. Blomstedt. What steps should school districts and states take to make sure all educators feel safe and secure?
First of all, it's absolutely critical that schools, as they're working on their reopening plans, are working with their teachers. We actually have kind of embedded safety committees that include teachers, so that's imperative. But really working with each teacher, I really have a people-first strategy working with our agency. I've really tried to promote that with our schools as well, that they're asking each teacher about what their concerns are and making those accommodations as best they possibly can to come back to the school facility.
I am out of time, but maybe our other witnesses could respond to me in writing and talk to me about how schools are dealing with that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have one question and then some closing comments. And Secretary King, I did want to ask you, there are over 1.5 million students who are experiencing homelessness enrolled in our public schools. And this number is going to grow because of the increase in unemployment and other financial stresses on families right now. And I am really concerned that due to inequitable internet and device access, we've just talked about school budget cuts that are coming, staggered school schedules, ongoing distance education, that schools are going to find it really difficult to prioritize the needs of students who are experiencing homelessness. Dr. Blomstedt and Dr. Schwinn, maybe I'll direct this to you. What actions did you take to make sure schools in your state were in regular touch with students and families who are experiencing homelessness? And what are schools doing in your state now to make sure they have the capacity to provide high quality instructional services to these students? And Dr. Blomstedt, let me start with you and then Dr. Schwinn.
Yeah, no, thanks for that question. And we've been very concerned about our homeless students, our systems involved students right now in this moment in time. Many of our schools really worked hard to contact each family and started to find ways that they were able to do that. I was very impressed to see teachers really, even though they might have been teaching remotely, doing evening phone calls, making those close contact type of connections, making sure folks are all right. We did food drops, and as part of that was trying to ensure that those families were being recognized. Our homeless population is obviously a huge concern. And so I don't know that we have every strategy down, but I know there was an intentional effort by schools to check in on every single student on their roles. And in some cases, there were some concerns where we couldn't find necessarily what might happen, and really some intentional efforts to track down students if they weren't being responsive to the schools.
Dr. Schwinn?
Yes, ma'am. So to start out, Governor Lee announced a child wellbeing task force with the specific intent of considering the full needs of our students when school buildings are closed. That continues through the summer, and we're continuing that through this coming school year, understanding the challenges. When I think about other things that we've done, we've put out a toolkit specifically for our highly mobile, our students who might be homeless in foster care, et cetera, so that we can have additional supports for those kids who need it the most. And frankly, I think about places like Shelby County in Memphis, Metro Nashville, and our First Tennessee region in Far East. And when I think about what those districts are doing, they are making sure that they're doing calls every day. We're setting up and working closely with our State Board of Education to ensure that learning plans for next year require and support that level of contact with our kids, because we have to make sure that whatever school looks like in whatever community and those locally driven decisions, that we're able to focus on the two most important things. Our kids are safe and healthy, and they're getting a high quality education.
Thank you. And Superintendent Cordova, does Denver have a McKinney-Vento liaison in place with the capacity to make sure students who experience homelessness and get equitable access to education?
We do, but I do want to really stress the intensive effort that our teachers and support staff had to go into during this time of remote learning. Our students who are experiencing homelessness were definitely some of the hardest to reach students. There were students who lacked consistent access to internet. They were families that were experiencing multiple issues and at very high risk of infection. And so we know that it was an intensive effort, and sometimes successful, sometimes very challenging, to keep those students engaged in school.
Okay, well, thank you. And Ms. Chairman, thank you. Thank you to all of our witnesses today. And as students and families and educators and staff across the country wrap up this school year and begin to look to the next one, there are a lot more questions than there are answers. I know that schools and districts are not only grappling with how to provide students with a high quality public education, whether in person or virtually, but they're also grappling with some of the biggest cuts to state and local revenue that we have seen in a very long time. Schools and school districts shouldn't be on their own. They need support and resources from the federal government. They need in-depth, actionable public health guidance on best practices to ensure the safety of students and educators and school staff and the broader community. And they need a massive investment in our public school system so schools have the resources they need to implement public health protocols, to measure and address learning loss among their students, and to offset the declines that they're going to be seeing in state and local funding. And what they don't need is Secretary DeVos using this crisis to push her privatization agenda and compound the difficulties they're facing. So before I close, I just wanted to emphasize once again how crucial it is that this committee and the American people actually hear from the administration and from Secretary DeVos. So as students and educators prepare for the incredibly challenging school year ahead, they deserve to know that all of us, including Secretary DeVos, are doing everything we can to support them. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the hearing.